Hello, welcome to another lesson. In the last lesson, we learned the first method used to modify WooCommerce template files. We learned the pros and cons of that method. Well, we did a lot of nice things. Today, I will explain the second way of doing the same thing. This time, we will use WooCommerce action hooks and filters. I start by saying the pros and cons. The method I'm going to show today is the one recommended by WooCommerce. The advantage is that you need to make as few changes as possible to the template file. On some occasions, you don't even need to make a copy of the file as we did in the previous lesson because there's no need to change anything in the file. So you don't need to worry in most cases if some WooCommerce update makes any changes in a file already modified by you. However, as you will see, it is a bit more complicated to understand how the process works. That's why I would like to ask for your extra attention in this lesson. I'll try to be as clear as possible, but if you have difficulty understanding, watch the lesson once more or as many times as necessary, okay? So let's go. The first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna rename the file we created in the previous lesson. And at the end, I'm gonna delete the file since the process I'm gonna show today is totally different from the one I used in here. I'm gonna use this file just as a reference for what I have to do. So now it's like this file doesn't even exist since WordPress doesn't recognize it by its name. Yes, there is a logic behind the name of this file, but I will not explain now, not to confuse you. I'll start by opening the original file. Okay, our goal will be to insert the same content that we inserted in the previous lessons file, but without modifying a single line of this file here, which is the original one. Well, how would that be possible, you must be wondering. In the last lesson, I began to talk a bit about how we should read all this code inside the file. I said that all these snippets that start with do action are called action hooks. You even remembered that we identified one of these hooks at the beginning of the course when I showed you how the enqueuing mechanism works in WordPress. If I were to explain in a very simple way, the goal of the hooks is basically to add a certain amount of code at a certain point on the page. Follow my reasoning. This portion of code must have an origin, right? Usually it comes from some function. So the goal of a hook in WordPress is to run some function at some point in the WordPress page. In technical terms, we say that a hook fires some function during a certain moment of the WordPress code execution. To demonstrate all that, I'm gonna count on the help of a wonderful plugin called Simply Show Hooks. Let's install this plugin. Okay, plugin installed. Let's go to the front end. And here you see this menu. When I choose the Show Action Hooks option, pay attention to what will happen. Boom! The screen was filled with green spots. Some of them are greener, with red numbers, while others are lighter. If I hover over this greener, I can see some information. Look at this. I have one named WP&Q Scripts. Man, we know this name. Isn't that the name of the hook that enqueues our style sheets and JavaScript? Let's see what pops up when we hover over it. So check it out, this is the function that adds our style sheets. Let's open the functions.php file and I will show you something. So it means that if I find the after setup theme hook, it should have a function called fancy lab config fired on it. So let's see if I am right. Look at this, here's the action hook, and here's the function. Another interesting thing is that we have a priority associated with each function inside the hook. Here it is saying that the priority is 0. And if you go back to the functions.php, We see that 0 is the number we passed here at the end of the add action. Great. So in WordPress, each add action corresponds to one do action. The point where the do action function is called are known as action hooks. Add action is used to add something to these hooks. We can add as many actions as we want on each hook. WordPress chooses the order in which each of these actions is executed by their priority. We can have priorities that start at 0, which is the highest one, and can be any positive integer number. The default priority is 10. The comments that we can find in the template files help us understand this. Here, for example, in the WooCommerce before main content hook, there's an information saying that these 3 actions are being fired. One with the priority 10, one with the priority 20, and the last 30. It's the same thing that the plugin is showing us. So let's see if you've come to the same conclusion as me. So to be able to change the contents of the template file, I just need to add some action on the action hook that I want. As an action is a simple function, I just make it echo out some HTML tags. That's very simple. Do you remember that in the previous lesson we started by adding the container and the row before the WooCommerce before main content hook? Let's do the same thing now, but without touching the original file. To do this, we are going to use the functions.php file, which is already open here. And here below, we are going to add the first action. Let's fire this action into the WooCommerce before main content hook. And let's say that this hook will trigger a function called fancy lab open container row. Let's create this function down here. And let's just say this. That is, this function will simply open the Bootstrap container and the row for us. As a precaution, I've added one more class here to be able to style the div later called shop content. This class doesn't exist anywhere, okay? I'm defining it for the first time. For now, it's not doing anything either. Let's save it and see what happens. And here on the hook, we've already fired the function we've just created. If we inspect the code, our container and the row are here, look, but still in the wrong place. You will certainly remember that they had to stay before the div with the primary ID. So how are we going to get it shown a little earlier? Well, you can see here that since we didn't specify a priority for this function, it appears on the hook with value 10. What if we passed a priority with a lower number? For example, 5. Let's do this. Now let's test. Oh, now it's working. Both of them appeared in the right place. All this because we have changed the priority of execution of the function. Very good. Now, since we opened the two divs, we have to close them too. Since we opened the divs in the WooCommerce before main content hook, there must be a hook called WooCommerce after main content. So it's here. And in the template code too. Let's add an action to this hook. Copy this and change here to after. Let's call this action fancy lab close container row. We pass the priority 5 here too, just in case. And let's say that it closes the two divs at once with the echo command. Visually, this won't change anything, but if we don't close what we open, of course, we might have problems with HTML. So always close the elements. There's only one problem. Let's disable the plugin for now, and let's inspect the code. We have the container and the row in the right place, but they're only wrapping this first div. The sidebar div is outside the Bootstrap grid. It should be here at this point and not here. Well, what if we could remove this hook from here and move it to this other point? Luckily, this is also a possibility. In the same way that we add actions on hooks, we can also remove them. Coming back here to the code, notice that there is an action called WooCommerce get sidebar on the WooCommerce sidebar hook. Let's remove the action from here and add it to another hook. Pay attention. To remove an action, we use remove_action. It's the opposite of add action. We indicate the name of the hook from which that action will be removed. In our case, it will be removed from the WooCommerce sidebar hook. Then we pass the name of the action that will be removed. WooCommerce get sidebar. Just pay attention to one thing. If the priority is different from 10, you should pass the previous value of the priority of the function on the hook. In this case, we will not pass anything because the priority was 10. Refreshing the page. Now we see that the sidebar is gone. But let's do some magic now. Let's add the action now on this hook here, WooCommerce before main content. Let's see what happens. So we already know how to do this. So the hook is still the same. We just have to know what priority should be passed. Let's try to set it to 10 first. So by default, the value is already 10 because every time we don't pass anything here, it means we're passing the value of 10. It hasn't worked yet because it should be here. Let's try 6. Because in priority number 5, we already have the container and the row. Excellent, at last. It looks like we're playing with puzzles. Great. Well, the only missing thing is that we put these two elements inside the column classes. This won't be so complicated. We just need to know how to fit the divs here using the correct priority. Let's start with the sidebar. Let's try to create an element that can wrap this div. Let's call this function fancy lab add sidebar tags. We're just gonna change the priority here. We will set a priority of 6 here and 7 in this previous action. That's because first comes this div with the column classes. And then inside it, we got the sidebar. You can even organize the code better, like this. This way it makes more sense visually. I mean, first priority 6 and then 7. And here inside the echo, let's pass those classes we already used in the previous lesson. And I also want to add one more class called sidebar shop. Okay, the div opened in the right place. Now to close the div out, we can add one more function passing the priority of 8. There you go. Now the div opens here and closes here. Fantastic. To finish out, let's do something with this primary div. Let's add the beginning of the column still in the WooCommerce before main content hook with priority 9. And the closing div in the WooCommerce after main content hook with a priority number 4. Okay, now that's correct. And we got the same look we had in the previous lesson. If we resize the page, we will see that the behavior is the same. That's because we use the same column classes. The advantage is that we don't need to mess with the original file or make a copy of it. We don't need to worry about updating the file when a WooCommerce update comes out, which is very good. The downside is that it's a slightly more complicated method to understand at first. I advise you to leave these changes very well documented so you don't get lost. That's what I'm gonna do here later. As you see later too, it's not always possible using this action hook method, and sometimes it's not worth it. So it's always up to you which method to use. But one thing is still missing. I said that there was also another mechanism that allows you to make changes to the template file called filters. What are they and how can we take advantage of these filters? You'll find out in the next lesson. So until then.